Good morning. I'm Lucy Beednell with the ARC of Northern Virginia. I am very excited to be here with you all today and for folks who are watching this later. As a parent, I can say that the thing that has most threatened my sanity over the last dozen years are the times when my children are not sleeping, right? It's nerve-wracking, and we as families can't function when that isn't there anymore. And I will say that MeBe, who's a great therapeutic partner, has been really lovely in offering information about their services and members of their team up to help our families. And when they said that they had someone who was a sleep expert, I think I maybe literally jumped out of my seat with excitement, saying, this is an area where we get plenty of questions and have way too few resources. So it is with great pleasure that we bring you Alison Moser today, who is absolutely a sleep guru and has some really wonderful ideas on how to promote healthy sleep. So Alison, please take it away, and thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wanted to go over a little bit about why I got into sleep. I am the director of clinical training and fieldwork programs at MeBe, which is an ABA company. We also offer occupational therapy and speech language therapy. And I work in the ABA department. So I work a lot with kids who have maybe some behaviors of concern and some communication delays. But one thing I was seeing kind of across the board was all of my parents complained that their child didn't sleep. And for a long time, I was just told, oh, melatonin, have calming things before bed. And, families are trying these things and it's not working. And so I decided to get some training in my field on sleep, which is, behavioral methods. And one of the things that I learned is that one of the most recommended treatments for sleep issues is melatonin or any sort of pharmaceutical. And it's not always going to promote quality sleep. It might help you fall asleep faster, but you're still going to wake up a lot during the night. You might feel really groggy in the morning. And so there's not a lot of research out there in terms of how beneficial we can make pharmaceuticals for your entire sleep duration during the night. And especially with little kids, there's a lot of, pros and cons to putting them on medication for something like sleep, but sleep is so integral to our health, not just the child's health, but caregivers as well, because if your child's not sleeping, you're not sleeping, and it's just not good for your health. So I learned a lot about behavioral methods, and I started doing sleep training with my clients, and I was kind of shocked of how well it worked. I would tell people it feels like it's magic almost. It's hard. It's a lot of hard work, but it was really beneficial. And if you stick to the plan, it works really, really well. And it's nice to not have to go to medication for something like that. I do want to point out some kids do need medication. I'm not a doctor, so I always tell families, consult with your doctor first if there's other health issues that might be underlying. But behavioral methods that I'm going to go over today are really, really beneficial. And like Lucy said, feel free to use the Q&A for questions. If I see a question pop up that might be addressed later in the slides, I might tell you to hang on. And then if we have time at the end, I'll try to go through them. One thing I also want to let everybody know is that sometimes when we're talking about sleep, we get a little nuanced or really detailed about our own children. And I might not have an answer for you, but I will give you my contact info at the end. And maybe I can help you work through some of those little, context things that I need, because it's really hard to make recommendations for specific children without knowing them or seeing what their sleep habits look like. So I just wanted to give everybody that heads up. Okay. So first things first, I'm just going to go over a little bit about the services that we offer at MeBe. It'll be really quick. I kind of already alluded to them. And then I'm going to get into the sleep. I'm going to talk about healthy sleep and then the areas that I commonly treat in terms of sleep issues. And then I'm going to go over some general and more specific solutions for combating those issues. So who are we? MeBe is a premier provider ensuring every child has immediate access to ethical, evidence-based therapies. We are all over. We're based in San Diego, California. We're also in Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Seattle, Mesa, Arizona, Houston, Texas, and obviously Virginia. We do provide ABA therapy, speech and language therapy, and occupational therapy. And currently in Virginia, we offer speech and ABA. So we are trying to get OT in Virginia, but we're not quite there yet. But we just started offering speech services, which is really exciting. If you want to learn more about some of our services, maybe you want to learn more about what insurance we take, if you're interested, you can go to mebefamily.com to learn a little bit more. Okay, let's get into the topic that everyone is here for today, which is sleep. So before we talk about sleep issues, I want to talk about what is defined in the research as healthy sleep, because not a lot of people know. And you might be like looking through these things and being like, oh, I thought my sleep was pretty good, but according to research, it's not that healthy. And I want to also preface that, everyone's going to have nights where they don't sleep as well. That is normal, but I'm talking about every single night you're seeing these things. That's where it starts to get a little bit more unhealthy. So what do the experts consider as healthy sleep habits? So they all agree that falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes ish of if your head hitting the pillow, staying asleep for the majority of the night, waking fairly easily in the morning, and then feeling relatively well rested throughout the day. There's a lot of quotes on here because it's hard to define what is fairly easily, but basically waking fairly easily in the morning means that you're not snoozing 10 times and it's really hard to like wake up. I think we all have night or mornings like that. But again, every single day it's taking you several snoozes to wake up. And then also too, for staying asleep for the majority of the night, it is very natural and normal for human beings to wake up a couple of times during the night, but it should be a really quick, like, oh, thank goodness it's 2 a.m. I have several more hours to sleep. And then you go back to sleep, or you might get up to go use the restroom and then you can fall back asleep relatively easily. And then I think the thing that most families that I consult with, where they're like, that is something I had never heard of before, is actually the first one, because sometimes it takes people a lot longer to fall asleep than 10 to 15 minutes. So I say 10 to 15 minutes ish. It's taking more than like 20. Your body might not be ready to go to sleep yet, or there's other things in your environment that are preventing you from falling asleep, which I will talk a lot about today. So before we get into sleep issues that we see in treatment, I want to talk about some statistics first, because sleep is a huge area of need for families. So 35 to 50% of young children are reported to have sleep issues. So it takes them too long to fall asleep. They're waking up a ton of times during the night, or they wake up really early. But of that statistic, when you're looking specifically at autistic children, the numbers go way up, and it's about 63 to 73% of autistic children are reported to have sleep issues. And now more current research is getting closer to 80%, which is really staggering. And the reason why I share that statistic is because I primarily work with autistic children. And to kind of go back to what I was saying before, when I was starting out in the field, it was really common for a lot of the families that I work with to state that, yeah, my child doesn't sleep. It takes them, an hour or two to fall asleep every night. And they were just kind of told that that is just an autistic trait. And that is not true. Autistic children or children with other developmental disabilities can fall asleep in healthy manners with healthy sleep in general. But the reason why the statistics are so different is because everyone has kind of assumed that that is just normal, and it's not. Also too, to kind of go back to what I was saying before, a lot of the time with children with developmental disabilities, they go to the doctor and the doctor will recommend medication. And pediatricians, I think the average of instruction they get during their schooling on pediatric sleep is less than 10 hours, which is not a lot. And so there's just not enough research out there about the pharmaceutical stuff with sleep. There's a lot more research coming out about behavioral treatments, which is what I'm going to specifically talk about today. But specifically, if you do have a child who's on the spectrum, they can sleep just as a neurotypical child, but also the strategies that I'm going to go over can be applied with any child. The only thing I recommend, like I said before, is if there's other health conditions going on. I know a lot of time with children who have epilepsy or other like GI, gastrointestinal disorders or allergies, other health conditions, it's definitely important to go to the doctor first to just clear out, is that what's affecting sleep? I know specifically with epilepsy, that can definitely impact your sleep because your brain patterns and waves are getting disrupted with seizure activity sometimes. So I always say, go to the doctor first, get cleared. And then if everything looks good, we can work on behavioral methods to treat. Okay, so I'm going to go over some sleep averages. This is just averages. So if your child sleeps a little bit more or a little bit less, that's probably okay. But I wanted to kind of go over this because what I see a lot when I'm working with families, and I've worked with all ages. I've slept trained 3-year-olds. I've slept trained 12-year-olds. A common thing that I'm seeing is that sometimes we're expecting the child to be asleep for too long. And that is actually why they're having issues sleeping, because their body just doesn't need as much sleep as they did when they were younger. So as you know, a 2-year-old, obviously they're going to be sleeping half the day almost. But most of that is during the night, and they might have about a nap for 2 hours. Again, these are just averages, but then you'll see as they, turn 3 and 4, those naps drop off. And at 5, they really shouldn't be napping anymore. Obviously, we're all going to have a day where we're just really tired and we just take a nap. That's normal. Adults do it too, but again, not in their regular routine. And then, as you get older and older, like kids are still sleeping quite a bit of hours throughout the night, including teenagers as well. But a lot of the times if I'm, sleep training a 6-year-old and they're napping during the day, that's one of the things that I work on first is like, let's get that nap down and see if that kind of helps sleep during the night too. Okay. So we know a little bit about what healthy sleep looks like. So what are the common sleep issues that we see? So there's 4 main areas that I target with sleep training. The first one is nighttime routine noncompliance. So this is just a child who is getting time to get ready for bed, and they start engaging in any sort of behaviors that might disrupt that routine. Maybe they're whining, maybe they're protesting a little bit, maybe they're running away from you and making it a game when it's time to put pajamas on or brush teeth. This is really common with all children. I know, when I was a child, I definitely protested during this because I didn't want to go to bed. I wanted to stay up and play and watch TV and stuff like that. So a little bit is normal, but sometimes when you're having those behaviors, it can definitely disrupt your sleep when it's time to actually lay down. So we're going to talk a little bit about this today. The most common one I see is the next 2 bullets. So the first one is sleep interfering behaviors. Or irregular sleep dependencies. I'm going to use those 2 terms interchangeably, but they mean the same thing. And that just means that they need specific items or people with them in bed to fall asleep. So common one I see is they need mom or dad in their bed to fall asleep, or they need their iPad, or they need music or the TV. A lot of adults need TVs to fall asleep. I was that adult for a really long time until I learned about sleep training, and then I tried to fade out the TV as well. That is a really common area I see with a lot is they need an iPad or a TV or a caregiver. And that kind of ties into the next one, which is nighttime awakening. So I work with a lot of kids who wake up during the night for longer periods than what is deemed normal. So I kind of talked about that earlier. It's normal for you to wake up a couple of times during the night, check your phone, make sure, oh, I have more time to sleep, or, oh my goodness, my alarm's going to go off in 30 minutes. And then you just kind of force yourself to stay awake. Or if you do what I do, I try to get 30 more minutes. And then when my alarm goes off, I'm regretting it because I feel extra groggy. But for kids, they're waking up, they're usually getting out of bed, they're saying they're hungry, and they're awake. And then delayed sleep onset is another common one I see, where it takes them more than 15 minutes to fall asleep. Remember I said 10 to 15 minutes-ish is the healthy range of your head hitting your pillow. So that's not, getting into bed and reading books. It's good night, Johnny. They lay down. And from that point, 10 to 15 minutes. I've worked with many kids where sometimes it takes them several hours to fall asleep. A lot of the kids that I work with have areas or issues in all of these areas or a couple. Like I said, the most common ones I see are the first or the second 2 bullet points. So I'm going to give you some general tips to help promote healthy sleep. And then I'm going to get into kind of like the nitty gritty of the actual sleep training, which is a little bit more intense. So bear with me. I'm going to give you some general tips first. You might be like, well, my child doesn't sleep. I've heard of these things. I've been doing these things, but hold on. I'll give you some additional tools as well. So some general tips: you need to have consistent bedtimes and wake up times, including weekends and school holidays, which is always something that I think is really hard for families, because if your kid is up, you have to be up too a lot of the times because you have to entertain them. But what happens is if they are going to bed at, a certain time on weeknights and waking up at a certain time on weeknights, and then it's vastly different on weekends and school holidays, it actually really disrupts your sleep cycle, and you might not see it right away, but it will impact going to bed during the week when you actually are on a crunch or like a time schedule. It includes even if the kid for some reason goes to bed super late. Maybe you had a school performance, maybe you had a doctor's appointment and you got stuck in traffic. And so it kind of just threw off your whole routine. Trying to make sure that they still wake up at the same time that they usually do within like 30 minutes. Obviously, give them a little bit of extra time, but we don't want them, if they're usually up at 6 o'clock during the week, we don't want them sleeping until 9 on the weekends. The only thing that I would say, I would give like a little caveat, is a teenager. Sometimes with teenagers, the way that their sleep cycle usually works is, in general, in our country, the school system for older kids is not really built for a teenager's sleep schedule. And so they are waking up really early and they are going to school usually really too early for their sleep cycle. So sometimes on the weekends, you don't really catch up on sleep, but they tend to sleep a little bit later during the week. Another thing I tell families, just general tips: having highly engaging activities or toys put away at bedtime if they're normally kept in the child's room. Because if you have a kid who takes a long time to fall asleep, or they wake up during the night, they might go find those toys if they're like on the floor and start playing with them. And it kind of just triggers their body to wake up more fully, which can lead to a lot of issues. Dark bedrooms are really, really important. I know this is one of the things I'm really sensitive to, because of the blinds I have at my house. If the sun is up, I'm usually up, even when I'm really, really not a fan of that. So, getting blackout curtains is really, really important. You know, in the morning when your like body is starting to kind of go through a different sleep cycle, or you're out of REM, you're getting ready to wake up, you might be waking up a little prematurely just because it's too light in your room. Comfortable bedding and pajamas is another thing as well. I have worked with a lot of kids who go to bed with full pajamas on, and they always wake up in the morning throwing the pajamas off sometime during the night. If you're seeing that with your child, there's probably too many layers on them when they're going to bed. Usually during the night, our body temperature sometimes increases. We get a little sweaty sometimes, especially if you're like me, where I don't roll around a whole lot. I kind of just stay in the same spot. You can get really overheated that way if you have too many layers on. And then the last thing I'll talk about, which is another really common thing I see with my family, is having the child go to bed when they're actually tired. So everybody goes through, I have this little visual on the slide. We all go through the same cycle. So you go to bed at night, and you might, you see these little dips right here in the sleep section during the night. You have your deep REM sleep, and then you have like you're not so asleep, but you're still asleep, but it's a little bit of a lighter sleep. And then you wake up, and then you become alert. It might take you a little bit to become fully alert because you got to have your coffee, you need to get moving, take your shower, et cetera, et cetera. We all, including kids, have a midday dip in alertness, which means that we're getting, I call it like the afternoon slump, where you're like, I just want to take a nap right now. We all feel it. It shouldn't be enough where you can't do your activities, but it should be something that you're like, oh, I need a break, or I need to go take a little walk or something, or go eat something. And then usually what happens to me is I'm tired during my work day, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to take a nap when I get home. And then as soon as I get home, I'm like super alert, and I'm like doing my chores and all the things. And I was like, I've been tired all day. Now I'm super alert. Kids experience that as well, but because kids typically have earlier bedtimes, they sometimes are being put to bed during this forbidden zone where they're way more alert and their body is just not able to go to sleep. So if you do have a child who maybe doesn't wake a lot during the night, but they take a long time to fall asleep, I always suggest, why don't you shift their bedtime forward 30 minutes and see if that helps? Sometimes even an hour. I know sometimes when your children are asleep, it's like the only time you get a break. And so sometimes families, like, they cling on to naps, or they want their child to go to bed super early. But you know, think back to those sleep averages. Am I expecting them to be in bed and asleep about the same time that's appropriate for their age group? Especially if it's taking them that long to fall asleep. So think about the forbidden zone, just something to think about. If your child takes like an hour, 30 minutes to an hour, or even longer to fall asleep, maybe just shift your bedtime slightly. And you can always do, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but you can always shift a little bit. Shift by 15 minutes. Okay, that didn't really do anything. Shift a little bit more. Obviously, there's some research and stuff out there. One of the resources I'll give you at the end, there's like, you sign up on the website, it's free, but they send you like a free kit. And on that free kit, it has like typical bedtimes that are appropriate based on age group. So I'll share that at the end as well. Okay. So I'm going to get into some more specific tips and what I actually do a lot with sleep training. So if you have a child who has nighttime routine noncompliance, so as like a reminder, you know, they're engaging in some behaviors, maybe they're a little bit more emotional, maybe they're running away from you. When it's time to get ready for bed, I really like using a bedtime visual. I have a couple on the screen that are just really basic. And then I start with more fun, active activities earlier on in the routine. And then as it gets closer to bedtime, those are more passive activities. So if I have a child who hates brushing their teeth and they're always fighting it, usually that's like one of the first things that I do. So that way, when, you know, because they're in like almost an arousal state, they're, you know, upset, they really don't like it, they might have some tears, you know, some emotional dysregulation. So I want to get the thing done because they have to brush their teeth for their health. But then I want to have enough time in the rest of the bedtime routine where that arousal state comes down, their heartbeat is more regular, their emotional regulation is a little bit more on point, they're a little bit more relaxed. So I'll do those things earlier on in the routine. One of the things I do sometimes for some of my kids who really have a hard time with this is I let them pick the order of activities to give them a little bit of a sense of control over it. So I might have like no, we have to do brush teeth first, but you can choose the thing that's after. And then if you want to, you know, do you want to switch these ones tonight? You know, just giving them a little bit of some choice in the matter can help a little bit. And then also too, I think a lot of time, when I talk to families, they feel a lot of guilt for having TV or screen time, especially, you know, towards the end of the day. And I say, use it. If that's something that they enjoy, that's totally fine. You can include it in the bedtime routine. I would just have it earlier on in the routine because it feels like it's passive because usually you're just sitting there watching, but a lot of the lights can, you know, they're triggering your brain waves. It feels more active to the brain. And then just making sure that there's a clear all done point, you know, because it can turn into an irregular sleep dependency where they need the iPad, they need the TV to fall asleep. And that is something that we don't want to have happen. And so usually what I do is like, let's just put it on earlier in the routine. Sometimes I'll have the family like sit down with the child and watch TV with them for some quality time. And then, you know, it's one show or two videos and then all done. All right. So now I'll give you a couple of tips about irregular sleep dependencies and sleep interfering behaviors. So to kind of go over it again, these are items or people that fall asleep with the child and potentially can cause them to wake up during the night. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean there. So if there are things that the child is going to fall asleep with, it needs to remain with them all night. Caregivers are not a good option because it's not realistic for a family member to sleep in the child's bed with them all night. That's just not going to be healthy sleep for the caregiver. TV is usually not a good option either, especially if you're using a sleep timer. So I'm going to kind of go over why these are not good options. So I talked earlier about how it's normal human behavior to wake up a couple of times during the night, roll over, get comfortable, fall back asleep relatively quickly within a couple of minutes. If you're falling asleep with something or someone, and then your body is waking you up normally during the night, If that same thing or person is not there with you, it almost triggers your body to fully wake up because something is different in my environment. So, if mom puts child to bed, they lay in bed together, mom, kind of rubs his head and rubs his back until he falls asleep, gives him a kiss, leaves the room, goes, does, their routine, goes to bed. And then, 1 o'clock in the morning, the child kind of wakes up, immediately can tell the bed is cold, can tell mom's not there. It's going to trigger them to go find mom. And now they're awake. So when you're choosing sleep dependencies, because we all have them, we just have to find healthy ones. I give them a rule of thumb, like it should be something that they can take on vacation with them. So, teddy bears, water bottles, a favorite blanket. White noise machines are really, really good. I personally don't like them for myself, but I do sleep with a fan on. So I guess that's kind of like a white noise machine. It's just like in the flesh, I guess. Because I know some people on their white noise machine, they have like a fan or rain or something like that. But something that, you can pack in your suitcase and take with you. I always tell families be careful about drinks. I have a water bottle next to my bed because I wake up sometimes and I'm thirsty during the night. However, if you have a kid who maybe drinks a little bit too much during the night, they might have accidents, which again can create, I'm now fully up. I need to go get mom and dad. I need to change my bed sheets if they had an accident, et cetera, et cetera. So just be careful with that. Maybe don't fill the water bottle up all the way, maybe do it like halfway if you anticipate that being an issue. And then keep highly engaging toys out of the bed. If they are waking up during the night and, it's taking them a couple of minutes to fall back asleep, which again is normal, but they see like, oh, my favorite toy's right next to me, they're going to start playing with it. And then their body is going to naturally wake up a little bit more and it's going to be even harder to fall asleep. So before I get into more strategies, one thing I want to note is because so many kids have multiple issues or multiple areas, addressing nighttime routine noncompliance and addressing sleep interfering behaviors usually kind of helps the other areas as well. It's kind of like an all for one kind of deal. Not always, but a lot of times that's kind of what I see. So before I get into the next couple of strategies, I'm just going to check the questions. So is there a problem with keeping a TV or music on if it doesn't seem to be inhibiting the child from falling asleep? I say no. I don't think it's that big of an issue. I think if it's, I would definitely say if you're going to have music or TV on and it's kind of like a no-go, like we're not negotiating that, it cannot be on a sleep timer. I don't know if any of you have ever fallen asleep with the TV on, but I did that for like the first 25 years of my life. And if I ever had a sleep timer on or like the video changed, if I was like watching YouTube or something, the change in the sound triggers you to wake up. So if the TV goes off, you like wake up and you're like, what changed? And then you're like, oh, it's quiet in here. It's the same thing. So I would just, if you're going to have them fall asleep with music or TV, keep it low. Don't keep it something super reinforcing, and then make sure that it is not going to turn off during the night. Peggy says, does ASMR videos help the kids to sleep? My child or my kid watches ASMR videos before bedtime. I wonder if it helps the sleep or hinder it. My kid takes melatonin every night. I don't know about the research on ASMR videos. I know this is something that my best friend like swears by. So I just say, look at your child's sleep behaviors. If they are waking up a lot during the night, it might be hindering it. My only thing is usually I would find like an ASMR video that's like 10 hours. So that way you're not cycling through a bunch of different videos, because the change in the videos, like on a playlist, can sometimes be drastic changes in volume. And that can trigger a child to wake up. Also too, one thing I've noticed with YouTube sometimes is YouTube ads are a lot louder than the actual video. And so that can trigger kids to wake up as well. So I say, if you feel like it's helping, you can you can try it. I would just look at your child's behavior and see if you feel like it's helping or hurting. Okay, so next let's move on to what I call the nitty gritty. So a lot of what happens with kids is they wake up during the night and they come to the caregiver's room. This most likely happens because the child fell asleep with a parent or another irregular sleep dependency like a TV or their favorite toys or whatever. And when that child naturally woke up during the night, their body instantly triggered them to fully wake because something was different. When they're fully awake because of that environmental change, they get out of bed and go searching for that dependency. And I mean, I do this too, where sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and like, I can tell that I didn't have like a good dinner before because I'm like ravenous. And so I get up, go to the kitchen, find a snack really quick. Same thing happens with children. This is one of the harder areas to target is children getting out of bed. And it's a common area that I work with in traditional sleep training. It is a little time intensive and it can be a little bit emotional and just in general difficult because this is where you might lose some sleep during actual sleep training. So I'm going to go and break this down. A strategy that I use for kids that get out of bed, specifically when they're going to look for caregivers, is called time-based visiting schedules. So I'm going to go over it a little bit and kind of break it down of how I would traditionally do it with a family. So let's break it down. If I'm like, okay, I'm going to work with this child, I'm going to advise this family to start sleep training, we're going to set a goal bedtime first that is age appropriate. Putting a child to bed at 5 o'clock, probably not ideal. But like I said, at the end, you'll get a resource that has like traditional, relatively age appropriate bedtimes. And then I'm going to have them take some data over the course of a week. What time do you start your bedtime routine every single night? This is where I'm looking at like, oh, okay, we're starting our bedtime routine at a different time every single night. We need to work on that first. If you want the child to be in bed by 7 and the bedtime routine takes like 45 minutes, you should be starting like between 6 and 6:15. Don't do 6:15 one day and 7 the next day and 5:30 the next day. It needs to be consistent. The next one is, what time do you bid your child goodnight? Where you're like, okay, go to sleep now. We're done reading books. We're done talking about your day. Go to sleep. About how long does it take for your child to fall asleep? And so if you have a camera, this is really helpful. So you don't have to stay in the room, but even just popping your head in every couple of minutes to see if they're asleep is really helpful. However, sometimes if kids are awake, they're going to see you pop in and be like, what's going on? And then it kind of puts you back at square one, which can be a little bit of a nuisance. And then how many times do they get out of bed during night? And when do they wake up for good? So I take that information and then I start kind of developing a plan with the family. The average time the child is falling asleep is where you're going to start. If I have a goal bedtime for a child for 8 p.m., but they are regularly not falling asleep till 10 p.m., when we start sleep training, I'm not putting them to bed at 8 p.m. They're not tired. I know it's not going to be successful and everyone's just going to be really, really dysregulated. So I will start the bedtime routine with a goal to kind of get them into bed at 10 because I want them to be tired. If the child is not tired, they're not going to fall asleep within that 10 to 15 minute window. And then depending on how successful that first night is, I slowly shift the bedtime back 10 to 15 minutes until we hit that goal bedtime. How do I determine if the night was successful? If the child fell asleep within 10 to 15 minutes of being bid goodnight, I will shift that bedtime back. If it takes more than 15 to 20 minutes, I keep the bedtime what it is or shift it even later until we hit that window. So this can take several days. So let's say I'll kind of break it down a little bit further. So the family's like, I think it's age appropriate. I would like my child to, be bid goodnight around 8. We'll start the bedtime routine at 7:15. We'll make sure the fun activities, the really active activities are earlier on in the routine, and then, get more passive as we get closer to bed. But they're regularly in bed for 2 hours playing, and then they don't fall asleep till 10. Okay, night 1, we're going to start our bedtime routine around 9:15, 9:30. So that way they're ready to be big good night at 10. And then I watch and take some data. If they fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes, cool. That was a successful night. For night 2, I'm going to shift the bedtime back to 9:45 or 9:30. depending. And then, okay, we had a really successful night again. I'm going to shift it back to like 9:15, 9 o'clock. And then I continue that pattern until I hit 8 o'clock. And then that's where we'll stay. If let's say night one went really well, so I shifted it, but then night two, kid didn't fall asleep till 10:30. I'm like, okay, then I shift it back to 10. So sometimes it's normal to kind of go back and forth a little bit, which is a little exhausting and it can be a nuisance. But the plan will work if you stick to it. And I'm going to break it down even further. I see a couple of questions. How much of a difference in bedtime is problematic? So our target bedtime is 8:30 for our 6-year-old, and sometimes we get him in bed at 8, sometimes 8:30, sometimes closer to 9. I think I don't have like research to quote on this. I personally think a 30-minute window is okay. An hour window, kind of what you're showing, I would try to like get it down to at least 30 minutes of like either 8 or 8:30 or 8:30 or 9, not between 8 and 9, because that's a little bit much. So I would tweak that a little bit. Is co-sleeping considered an irregular dependency? I would say no, because if you're co-sleeping, usually you're in the bed the entire night with the child. So that's okay. Obviously there's a lot of research on co-sleeping. I'm actually not an expert in co-sleeping. That's usually, in the medical doctor field, which I am not, but it becomes an irregular sleep dependency because the parent falls asleep in bed with the child, but then leaves to go to their own bed at night. So, something changed. But if you're planning to stay in the bed all night with the child, then that's fine. Okay. So, time-based visiting. So, some housekeeping. For children who get out of bed often during the night, implementing a strategy called time-based visiting may be helpful, but it's super challenging. And this is where caregivers are going to lose some sleep or rest. That's why I say, if you're a caffeine person, load up because you're going to need it. And I am always really upfront with families before I start this because I want them to be understanding of what it's going to look like. The overall goal is to teach the child that they must stay in their bed and fall asleep without a caregiver's presence, because falling asleep with that caregiver's presence is the problem. That's what's waking them up during the night and getting them to come out of bed to go find the caregiver, which then disrupts your sleep anyways. So time-based visiting requires you to come in and out of the child's bedroom on a set schedule. It helps decrease their anxiety. They know mom is going to come back. I don't need to get out of bed to go find her. And then each day the visits happen less often with longer time in between. And then over time, the visits are faded out completely and you can just bid your child goodnight and then they fall asleep in their room on their own. There are going to be days, no matter how successful sleep training is, there are going to be days that kids get out of bed. That is just normal. Maybe they're not feeling good. Maybe they had a nightmare and they just want mom and dad or whoever. However, what we're really tackling is every single night, I want mom in bed with me, or I want to go into my caregiver's bedroom. So just know that there's going to be little flukes here and there with sleep sometimes. And like I kind of said already, progress is not always linear. There's going to be nights that there's a slight regression. Stick to the plan. And I'm going to go over why sticking to the plan is so important, but it is a marathon, not a sprint. And if you've ever toilet trained your child, a lot of it is kind of the same idea. You might have some success on like one day, and then you have one day where your child's having a ton of accidents and you have no idea what's going on. That happens with sleep too. Sleep is so integral to our health that when you're kind of disrupting what has been the routine for so long, you're going to get a little bit of pushback. So you just need to be prepared for it. So what does time-based visiting look like? So I usually take some baseline data. And so I tell families, I want you to see how long on average it takes your child to leave the bed after you tell them goodnight. How long does it take them to be like, oh, well, I'm going to get out of bed and go get mom? For some kids, it's immediately. For some kids, it might be a couple of minutes. If I found through baseline data that it's about 5 seconds before the child gets up and goes and looks for the caregiver, I start at 2 seconds. So when we're doing sleep training, this is what it's going to look like. On night one, caregiver bids the child goodnight. They leave the room. They come back 2 seconds later, tuck them in, give them a kiss, bid goodnight, leave the room. Really brief. They're not staying in very long. Then they come back 5 seconds later, do the same exact thing. Then 15 seconds later, then 30 seconds later, then a minute, and then so on and so forth until that child is asleep. So usually for the first night, especially if you have a kid who immediately gets out of bed to go look for you, you're going to be going in and out of their room a lot. If you have a kid who like usually it takes them 5 minutes before they start going and wandering to find their caregiver, it might be a little bit less intense because at least there's like 5 minutes where they're just kind of chilling in bed before they go looking for their caregiver. Then the second night, I start that first visit a little bit later than the night before. So instead of like coming back 10 seconds later, maybe we do, 2 seconds later for night one, I'll do 10 seconds the night after. And then again, each time I just add a little bit more time in between the visits until they fall asleep. You're basically trying to catch them before they come out. A lot of times when kids are getting out of bed is because there's a lot of anxiety. They're like, well, why are we doing something different? I want my caregiver. I want it to be like it's always been. And so you're challenging them, but we're trying to get them to learn, I'm here, you're safe. I'll come back. Stay in bed. I want you to fall asleep without me present. And so usually what I tell families is like, you can tell the kid that you're coming back to kind of keep them where they're at. I had actually the first child I ever slept trained, they had a really, really hard time. They had a lot of anxiety. And so one of the things that I instructed mom to do the first night, because he was so confused as to like what was happening, was when she would leave, she would tell him, I'm coming back. But then she could like hear him rustling in bed. And so she'd like kind of call out like, oh, I'm just putting the trash away, or I'm putting a new trash bag in. I'll be right there. I'll be right there. Stay in bed. And then kind of like just slowly walk to the room. Because, she just wanted to let him know, like, it's okay. I know it's different. I'm coming back. You're going to continue this time-based visiting schedule where every night you're kind of upping the ante slightly. You don't want to like go too much too fast. So if I have a kid who at baseline left the room after 5 seconds, and then night one, we did the first visit at 2 seconds, I don't want to do day two at like 2 minutes. That's too big of a jump. Going 2 seconds to 2 minutes, it's not going to be successful. So this might be where it takes a little bit longer. For some kids, getting down to where visits aren't needed at all, it might take a couple of days, because they catch on to the game really, really fast. Some kids, it takes a couple of weeks because there's just a lot of anxiety. I have also learned that just kind of through experience, that if the child is a little bit older, because there's a history, like a longer history of caregivers being in bed with them or being able to get out of bed, it takes a little bit longer with the time-based visiting, because you're just combating 10 years or 5 years of these irregular sleep dependencies. Whereas with a smaller child, it might be like 6 months or a year of learning history. So, the older the child is, this is a little bit trickier, but it works. I've done this with older kids as well. So let's put it all together. So I have this hypothetical child. Jeremy typically becomes upset or dysregulated when it's time to get ready for bed. Putting on pajamas is really difficult because he cries, he tries to run away from his caregivers. Once he's calm and ready for bed, he insists on caregivers reading books until he falls asleep. Once asleep, caregiver leaves his bed and shuts his door. Around 3 a.m., Jeremy will typically wake up and begin crying for the caregiver. If the caregiver hears him, they will go into his room and lay down with him until he falls back asleep. If they don't hear him because they're asleep as well, Jeremy will get out of bed and crawl into bed with the caregivers and then sleep the rest of the night in their bed. This is a really common sleep profile I see with the kids that I work with. So there's a couple of things happening here. So remember, there's 4 areas of unhealthy sleep. He's got 3. He's got nighttime routine noncompliance because he's having a hard time putting on his pajamas and engaging in some behaviors of concern. And then he's got irregular sleep dependencies. He's insisting on books until he falls asleep. And then he's waking up during the night and finding caregivers. There's no information here about what time he wakes up. If he woke up like every day at 4 a.m. ready to start the day, that would be an issue as well. But that's not listed here. So I'm going to break down what I would do as a sleep training program. before I get into the actual sleep training with the family, I'll make sure that they make a time, like they'll kind of get the routine more consistent, like start the same time every night. And then, um, you know, kind of just work on a couple of general things. Are their pajamas okay? What other things do they like during bedtime? And then I have them take like a week of that baseline data, see what's going on, and then we'll develop a plan together. So I would push his bedtime about 30 minutes after he typically falls asleep. So if the family through their baseline data is like, okay, put him to bed at 8, but he usually falls asleep by 8:30, 8:45 because he wants me to keep reading books, then I'll make his bedtime 8:30 or 8:45. I'll make a visual guide for his nighttime routine and have him choose the order of activities, but I will insist he puts on his pajamas first, since that's the hardest thing for him. And then maybe we can put something really fun after. So maybe if he really likes reading books, or he likes iPad or wants to watch a show, maybe first pajamas, then let's do the fun thing to kind of entice him and make it, a little bit more rewarding for him. And then I would have the family limit the amount of books in bed. I think this really is up to family preference, but insisting on reading until he falls asleep is the unhealthy part. But read books. You can read a couple. You just want to make sure that your child is awake when you bid them goodnight, because you don't want them to accidentally fall asleep while you're reading and you don't realize it, because then they've had that like conditioning almost where like, oh, beds, books and caregiver fall asleep. So I say like do 3 to 4, but again, it's preference. And then I'll have the parents bid him good night, leave the room, and come back a short duration later. If he wakes up during the night, caregivers will bring him back to his room and resume the waiting schedule until he falls asleep. Next day, I would suggest not letting Jeremy nap unless he normally has one. If he was able to fall asleep the night before within 10 to 15 minutes of being bid good night, I will shift the bedtime back by 15 minutes. If he's not able to fall asleep that quickly, I would keep the bedtime where it was at the night before and then resume the time-based visiting. So that's kind of just a general plan. Obviously, it seems a lot easier on paper because a lot of what I see is in the during the night. If you're doing time-based visiting, your child will still wake up during the night, even if they fell asleep without you in bed with them, because you're doing the time-based visiting. They are still going to get out of bed and try to go find you. And so you have to stick to your guns and bring them back, which you might see tears. And so I'll talk a little bit about that in general. But you really want to make sure that you're still kind of having that expectation of you need to fall asleep in your bed without me. I'm here, you're safe. I'm just down the hall. But to have healthy sleep, they need to fall asleep without those regular sleep dependencies. And I see I have a couple of questions, but I'm almost done, so I will hold off and answer them in a second. So closing thoughts. So sleep training is not easy. It is one of the harder things you'll do. However, the reward is really worth it because you're going to have better sleep and your child's going to have better sleep. It's just a lot of work, but it's temporary discomfort for really good reward. I always suggest start sleep training on a Friday or a school break if possible, because you tend to have a little bit of less stress because you don't have anywhere to be in the morning. Do not let your child sleep in extra or take extra naps during sleep training. This might mean for a very grouchy child, but it's going to help when it's time to actually put them to bed during the night because they're actually tired. So one of the biggest common mistakes I see families make, which is totally fair, because I think if I was a parent and didn't really know any better, I would do the same thing. We're like, okay, we did night 1 of sleep training. He did not fall asleep till 11 o'clock, but we did it. Took us 2 hours, lots of tears, lots of emotions. But then you're like, well, they normally wake up at 6, but they didn't fall asleep, at a good time. So they only got a couple of hours of sleep, and that's not good. And so you're tempted to let them sleep in until they naturally wake up. Then you're going to have a child who is not tired when it's time to go to bed, and you're going to have the same exact battle. So again, they might be a little grouchy. They might really want to nap. And so I say, do fun things during the day to kind of keep them awake. If you are fortunate to have help, rely on that help so the adults can get naps. So that way you are refreshed and ready to tackle the night. I know not every family has this luxury. So caffeine it up, make sure you have good food that's going to give you energy, and just stick to the plan. If you push your strategies and you're super firm for 2 nights, and then on day 3, you're so tired, and so you just let the child get into bed with you, it means that you're going to eventually have to start back at day 1, and it's going to be even harder the second time around, because the child had learned, oh, if I just kind of push it and kind of push back on it, eventually I got what I wanted. And so they've learned that. And so it's just going to be a lot harder. So I always tell families, if you're ready to do this, let's do it. But if you're having a little bit of reservations, I say, hold off. Because if you're having reservations, that means you might not be fully ready to do sleep training, and that is okay. I would rather you be fully ready, and then we tackle it and bust it out really quickly than have this back and forth, which eventually makes it way harder anyways. Like I said, there's going to be some tears because it is hard. We're challenging them to do something new, and at night we're really vulnerable. When you have the things, you've had it the same way for so long and you've grown accustomed to it, and then you're challenging that, it's really hard. So I always tell families, just make sure you acknowledge their feelings, you empathize with them, provide comfort, but stick to the plan. So when you're doing those time-based visiting, where you go in, bid goodnight, and then leave the room, you might be tempted to stay longer and provide longer bits of comfort. But what happens is the kid will fall asleep with you there, and then you kind of defeated the purpose of the strategy in the first place. So a lot of it is just like, I hear you. I know this is hard. You're doing so good. I promise you I'm down the hall. I'll come back in a few minutes. Just stay in bed. It's okay. You're safe. And just acknowledge that. And then during the day, spend a lot of quality time with them, doing fun things. It doesn't have to be like, we're going to go to a theme park. It doesn't have to be that wild, but, just spend quality time with them, because at night there's going to be higher emotions. And so it kind of helps offset that a little bit, where at least your day is a little bit smoother. They might be grouchy, but at least you can do some fun things. And then at night, they're a little bit more tired. They might be a little bit more emotional, but you've got that nice offset. I'm going to put up additional resources on the screen. And then the last slide has my email if you want to reach out to me. And then I'll answer the final question in the chat box. So Ready, Set, Sleep is an awesome resource. I went to a conference and I went to a sleep training thing, and Emily Varon, who has the same license and certification that I do, she has some free resources on her website. So when you go to the website, it'll say like, click here to get your free sleep kit, and you just put in your email and she'll send it to you. And she's got some really good visuals of like, how long should kids be sleeping? What's a good bedtime? But just know that all of those are averages. So, it doesn't have to be exactly those times. Another one, if you have a child who is really pushing back on sleep training, you might need somebody to kind of like walk you through it. ftfbc.com or FTF Behavioral Consulting. The owner is Dr. Greg Hanley, and he is actually the pioneer of all of the research of the strategies that I went over today. That's who I originally learned from. And so he is like the father of behavioral sleep training. And all of the people that work at his company are super qualified and really awesome. And then the last one is More Behavior Consulting. Dr. Kiera Moore, she does a lot of consultations with families that are struggling with sleep, and she's been doing this for a really long time. I actually trained under her as well, and she has worked with all different ages, all different types of sleep issues, and she does remote stuff, like she does remote meetings and consultations too, because I know sometimes some places will insist on being in person, but she is really good about supporting families remotely, so she can work with you in any state, which is really awesome. So I'll leave that up on the screen so you can jot those down if you would like. I have a question. So night terrors, do you address night terrors, not nightmares? I typically do not, because I don't have a lot of experience with night terrors. A lot of the times when families are like, yeah, I think my child has night terrors, and then I observe, I find that it's actually not. They're just having, nightmares. So I actually don't have a lot of experience with night terrors, but I do believe Dr. Kiera Moore does. So she might be a good person to reach out to. So I apologize, I don't have, any specific things there. But sometimes night terrors, there's a lot of underlying issues there that might be also medically addressed. So you might want to talk to your doctor about that. But like I said, sometimes pediatricians don't have a lot of training in sleep, which is why melatonin and like a couple of other pharmaceuticals are like clonidine are prescribed to children without any other strategies. All right, I am going to put my email up on the page. I really appreciate you all attending. I hope it was helpful. I know sleep is one of those areas that, you know, I have found that families just really need somebody to walk them through it and kind of go through the fire with them. But I have consulted with families before and given them some tips and things to try, everything that I've gone over today. And they, you know, were able to do it independently, and they were really, really happy about the positive outcomes. You just got to stick to it and just be prepared for it, not being super smooth sometimes, and that's okay. It's normal. But if you do have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. My email is Alison with 1L at needyfamily.com. I always tell families that, you know, I can't give really detailed advice without like consulting with you, like potentially over a Zoom call and stuff like that. But if you have just like a couple of questions that you feel like I didn't address today, or you had a couple more questions about one of the strategies that I went through, or you want more resources, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to share that with you. And that's all I've got. The questions you all asked today were fantastic, so I appreciate that.
You were fantastic. I wanted to give a huge Arc of Northern Virginia and participant thank you to Allison. I am looking forward to happier, healthier bedtimes in the Beadnell household coming forward. And I know that this information is just priceless for our families, right? Healthy sleep is the foundation of healthy days. Thank you so very much for being here and being so generous with your time. Thanks, folks, for your questions today. And we look forward to getting the recording and slides out to you if you signed up. If you're watching this recording later on our YouTube channel, you can always reach out at the arcofnova.org/answers, or just go to the arcofnova.org and click the orange rectangle at the top right corner of the screen that says I need help. And if you put a question there, it comes to me. Again, my name's Lucy, and I'm happy to help you find anything that you need. Thank you all again, and have a great day.